Un message. Et pour commencer, la ministre Freeland a indiqué qu'elle viendrait, qu'elle témoignerait aujourd'hui et qu'elle était libre pour le faire. Son bureau a communiqué avec le greffier. Elle arrive à midi. Elle viendra à midi pour témoigner.
Okay, so back to.
Thank you. If I could just do a quick summary, and then I will pass on my time to the next person on the list, of where we're at from the opposition's perspective. We've been having a discussion about ministerial accountability in this committee in our effort to get Minister Freeland to attend and answer questions for 2 hours, not one, for her budget, her 2023 budget, which lays out a fiscal framework of spending $3.1 trillion in the next 5 years. We have been unable to get that commitment. It's nice. I appreciate that the minister's now coming at noon, so we'll look forward to posing questions there. And I guess the skepticism that we were pushing forward, and obviously it's had some impact, was that the 3 previous occasions in the last 6 months that the committee had invited the minister to attend, including estimates, she was unable to. And my understanding is, under standing orders, it's generally mandatory ministers attend estimates, but the Minister of Finance has not. So we're happy that she's chosen to be here today. I'm hopeful that in the 48 days, I think it's been since the House has been sitting in January, and the minister has, I think, as of yesterday, attended 7 times in question period, that hopefully today will be the 8th in 48 days, or 49 days if you include today, that she attend to answer questions about the impacts of this spending on the cost of living for Canadians. The cost of living, as we know, we have record and persistent food inflation, which is hurting many families and poses a lot of questions that we need to ask the minister about why spending this amount of money and adding $130 billion to the national debt, she believes will actually reduce inflation and make life more affordable for Canadians. So, Mr. Chair, at that, I'll conclude my time and maybe be put back on the speaker's list if I can at the bottom and pass it on to the others.
Thank you, MP Perkins. I've got MP Zerowitz, then MP Beach.
Okay, Mr. Chair, I'm happy to pass along my time to the next speaker on the list, who's Mr. Beach.
Okay, so we're at PS Beach.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a unanimous consent motion that I'd like to kind of feel out the room on, although having some discussions, I think I know what the answer is, but I'd like to try anyway. That the sub-amendment to Mr. Blakey's amendment.
Member, so PS Beach.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all colleagues, including those opposite. And thank you, Mr. Lawrence, for the discussion, and thank you, Mr. Chambers, for your contribution in both clothing and in discussion. So I want to give a brief statement, and then I have another motion that I'd like to test for unanimous consent. So on April 19th, which is almost a month ago, not quite, we began discussions with all parties on a path forward to study the BIA. And we really, truly focused on trying to find a consensus position. And we also tried to focus on improving our study from the year previous. We did this in 3 ways. We allocated more time for witnesses. We agreed to send parts of the bill to committees, and we gave those committees actually more time to be able to do those studies. And we included the various aspects of the bill and which committees they would go to. That was also done by consensus, everybody contributing to that process, the Bloc, the Conservatives, the NDP, as well as the Liberals. We excluded a controversial part of that motion, which included an end date, because given goodwill, if we had agreed upon a study plan, no end date would be necessary. We'd have more than enough time to study the Budget Implementation Act. This resolution was designed to be a consensus resolution, but it is our feelings that the Conservatives changed the goalposts consistently to justify actually never starting the study, which is, of course, unfortunate, especially since this is similar to what happened last year. Recently, as they did at the meeting today, they've claimed that the minister would be unwilling to appear, or at least unwilling to appear for 2 hours. This was despite assuring the committee that she would appear prior to May 18th in a response to Gabrielle St. Marie's question more than 2 weeks ago. Since that assurance, we have faced more than 23 hours of Conservative filibuster, time that should have been given to food banks, Chamber of Commerce, and other Canadian stakeholders who could have helped us during all of that time improve the Budget Implementation Act. Prior to all of this, we unanimously passed a pre-study motion and were able to hear from departmental staff and send an invite to the minister. It is that original invite that the minister responded to and the reason that she is available here today. So what have the Conservatives actually been filibustering? It is an amendment to the original motion by Daniel Blakey to invite the minister to appear for 2 hours. It is unfortunate and somewhat confusing on our side that they would filibuster this motion given that it provides exactly what they are asking for. But more importantly, it is unfortunate that we are in a position where the Conservatives have held up the study, and that despite the will of the majority of people that sit around this committee who wanted to proceed with the study. However, I believe that we should not waste this opportunity to hear from the Deputy Prime Minister, and I believe that everyone around this table believes that we should not waste this opportunity to meet with the Deputy Prime Minister. So in that spirit, and following a very productive discussion with my colleagues opposite, I would seek unanimous consent for the following motion. That the committee temporarily and immediately suspend debate on the motion on the floor for the purposes of hearing testimony from the Deputy Prime Minister starting at 12 p.m. on May 16th. That during this appearance, no other motion be considered in order, and we immediately suspend until her appearance, and that following the Deputy Prime Minister's appearance, the committee resume debate on the current motion. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, P.S. Beach. I do have a speaking order here. I've got...
Well, I'm sorry. I'm just...
Oh, yeah, you're just asking for...
motion, and I'm going to keep the floor unless that's passed.
Okay, so what's being asked for UC?
Just
Members?
one quick clarification,
Yes.
if I can. I know it's dilatory. I think we're actually debating the sub-amendment to the motion, but as long as everyone's fine with that, I'm good.
True.
Yes, sir.
That's true, yes.
Yeah, the sub-amendment to the amendment from MP Blakey, and then it was MP Morantz is the sub-amendment, and to P.S. Beach's motion.
Just a quick clarification, I could, MP Beach. Is there a time amount that the minister has suggested in that she will appear for?
The motion states that she will be here at 12 p.m.
That's fine.
Do we have UC members?
Yes.
Yes? Okay, we have unanimous consent for that. Okay, yeah, we are suspended till the minister arrives. So welcome, Deputy Prime Minister, Minister of Finance. The Honourable Chrystia Freeland is with us, along with some officials. Minister, I know the members are eager to hear what you have to say, so you're going to have an opportunity for some opening remarks, and then we will move to the members' questions. So, Minister, the floor is yours.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Chair. Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'm very pleased to appear before you and members of the committee to discuss the Budget Implementation Act. First of all, I'd like to discuss the current state of the Canadian economy. Last year, Canada had the strongest economic growth among G7 countries, and in the first quarter of this year, our economic growth has been stronger than anticipated. Today, there are 900,000 more Canadians working compared to the beginning of the pandemic, and at 5% only, our unemployment rate is close to its historic low for 5 consecutive months. We've recovered 129% of the jobs lost during the pandemic compared to only 115% in the USA. Inflation fell to 4.4% after attaining a peak of 20% last June. The Bank of Canada anticipates that it'll go down to 3% this year and 2.59% by the end of this year. Our deficit should be lower than last year. Indeed, it should drop to 1.4% of the GDP. Our deficit and our debt to GDP ratio is among the lowest in the G7 countries and lower than other large AAA economies such as the Netherlands and Australia. These solid financial bases are at the basis of the budget I tabled in March. Bill C-47 implements a number of key measures in our budget, and which, in my opinion, will garner the support of the members of the committee.
It's so important that we work together to pass this legislation as quickly as possible. In our budget, we're cracking down on house flipping by fully taxing assignment sales, because homes should be for Canadians to live in, not a speculative financial asset class. To protect Canadians, we're also cracking down on predatory lending by lowering the criminal rate of interest from 47% to 35%. And we're imposing a cap on the cost of total borrowing for payday loans of no more than $14 per $100 borrowed. We're protecting air passengers' rights by making airlines more accountable for delays, cancellations, and lost baggage, and ensuring they compensate Canadians fairly for delays that are within the airline's control. We're modernizing the oversight of Canada's financial sector to ensure that our financial institutions act with integrity and that they're protected from threats of foreign interference. To help make the cost of education more affordable for students across Canada, we're increasing withdrawal limits for our ESPs from $5,000 to $8,000 for full-time students and from $2,500 to $4,000 for part-time students. To support the skilled tradespeople who are building our clean economy and working to double the number of new homes that Canada will build by 2032, we're doubling the tradespeople's tool deduction from $500 to $1,000, which will help them invest in the tools they need to do their important jobs. We're expanding the Canada's Workers' Benefit to reach 4.2 million of our lowest and often most essential workers, and introducing quarterly payments that put more of their hard-earned money back in their pockets sooner. We're supporting the implementation of the new Canadian Dental Care Plan, which will cover up to 9 million Canadians by 2025, and it will mean that in Canada, you'll no longer be able to tell how much money someone makes or how much money their parents make by their smile. Mr. Chair, these are just some of the essential measures in the Budget Implementation Act that are delivering on our plan to support Canadians from coast to coast to coast. I'm confident that members of this committee do support and will support these measures, and I'm looking forward to discussing it with all of you today.
Thank you, Minister Freeland, for those opening remarks. We are going to move into the rounds of questions now. In the first round, each party will have up to 6 minutes to ask questions. We are starting with the Conservatives. I have MP Holland for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. And I'll acknowledge that the Minister is here after multiple requests that she's ignored and refused to show up, even though the Governor of the Bank of Canada has come regularly at the committee's request. Minister, you said, quote, "What Canadians want right now is for inflation to come down and for interest rates to fall. And that is one of our primary goals in this year's budget, not to pour fuel on the fire of inflation. So in our budget, we will exercise fiscal restraint," end quote. And what we see, again, is your government spending is causing inflation to go up again, like it went up today. Your fall economic statement said you would balance in 27-28, but after your $43 billion budget bonanza, You say you won't balance the budget. Why did you mislead Canadians?
Mr. Chair, and MP Hallam. The only people who are trying, I think unsuccessfully, because Canadians are smarter than that, to mislead Canadians are the Conservatives on this committee.
What was the change? How come your budget didn't balance?
The reality, I'm sorry.
That was the question.
Member, MP Holland, yeah, we don't want the crosstalk for many different reasons. First is just in holding decorum and respect here at this committee. The other is the interpreters have often spoken to myself, to the clerk, etc., that they get affected. So they get affected by that crosstalk, and we don't want their health and safety to be impacted. So, Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'd like to address the two substantive points that were raised in the question. They are fiscal responsibility and inflation. When it comes to fiscal responsibility, let me emphasize a few points. Canada has the lowest deficit in the G7. Canada's fiscal position has been judged by the people who count the
Respectfully,
most.
Minister, I want to know what changed between.
Allow the minister to finish.
I only have limited time.
No, we've stopped your time, but we allow the minister. Again, the crosstalk. We don't want any crosstalk. Again,
it is my
allow
floor.
the minister to complete her answer to your question. Well, yeah, she actually has not taken up that much time compared to the answer, so we'll allow the minister to continue.
A little bit.
Yeah, thank you. If the Conservatives really are interested, as they should be, in the substance of what's happening in the Canadian economy, I'm happy to answer. So, on fiscal responsibility, Canada has the lowest deficit in the G7. We have a deficit which is steadily coming down.
That wasn't the question,
And we
Minister.
have, you did speak about the deficit, actually.
Yeah,
and we have a fiscal position.
Again, I'm going to have to interrupt again. So, MP Howland, anything through the chair, please.
Okay.
And
Chair, I'll move on from that question because the minister is not going to answer it.
Okay.
I'd actually like to finish my answer.
I'd like
just
to
allow for the finishing.
It's my floor.
Minister, if you could just wrap up the answer, and then we'll get to your next question. MP Howland, we did stop the time. Minister.
Thank you, Chair. And Canada has a fiscal position which has been judged by the people who count our ratings agencies to be strong and sustainable. S&P, after I tabled the budget, reiterated our AAA rating with a stable outlook.
You're not going to get to the answer, so I'll have to move on because my time is limited.
MP Howland. Okay, yeah.
So
go ahead.
I have a simple question for you. Just the date. When will the budget be balanced? Just the date.
As I said, the Conservatives seem uninterested in substantive answers. There was a question asked about inflation, and I think it is important to point out to Canadians that inflation is steadily coming down from its peak of 8.1% in June.
The question was not about inflation.
4.4%. The previous question was, and I didn't have a chance to talk about inflation, which I think is on Canadians' minds.
MP Howland, allow the minister, please, to conclude.
It was a simple question.
It
was a simple question.
Minister.
Just a date.
So, just to conclude on inflation, which I do think Canadians care about, it's come down from a peak of 8.1% to 4.4%. The Bank of Canada is forecasting it will be at 3% in the summer and down to below 3% by the end of the year.
So the question was not about inflation. The question about balancing the budget, which obviously the minister is avoiding, which means she has no plan, and that's proven from blowing through any type of fiscal restraint in her latest failed Liberal budget. Minister, you said in the fall that the debt to GDP ratio is a red line you would not cross. And in Budget 2023, you blew past that line for the debt to GDP ratio in the fall economic statement and increased it to 43.5%. Now debt to GDP won't fall below 40% until 27-28, where you still won't even balance your budget, where you misled Canadians. Considering your track record that might be optimistic, why are you not serious about fiscal responsibility?
Mr. Chair, I am absolutely serious about fiscal responsibility, and I would urge Canadians and members of this committee not to be misled by overheated partisan rhetoric and to listen to objective people we should trust. Let me quote the Parliamentary Budget Officer, who actually explained to this committee, and I'm quoting him now, when looking at G7 countries, Canada compares very favorably on net debt to GDP. The parliamentary budget officer also described 2 members of this committee, a conversation he had with Moody's, and Moody's told him, and I'm now quoting the parliamentary budget officer, that Canada's deficit should, according to the PBO, quote, make us quite happy because by European standards, that's very low. That's an objective judgment.
That's the same public budgeting officer that said that your financials are not keeping one's powder dry and your budget is not fiscally responsible. So I'll move on. You said government spending, quote, these are investments in our future and they will yield great dividends. In fact, in today's low interest rate environment, not only can we afford these investments, it would be short-sighted of us not to make them, end quote. Interest rates are high. The debt has doubled because your government has had out-of-control spending. Do you regret misleading Canadians with this statement?
I've already explained that in the view of objective observers, Canada's fiscal position is strong, indeed enviable. And I absolutely
Minister, you're going to have one of the worst GDP per capita growth in the G7.
MP Howland, please, no crosstalk. We're at the end of the time, but please, no crosstalk. We'd ask that all members. We are now moving over to the Liberals for 6 minutes. I have MP Baker, please.
Sorry, Mr. Chair's point of order.
Yes.
Really quick.
Point of order.
And I say this to help everyone. I'm wondering if we want to invoke through UC the Wayne Easter rule, where the question will match the length of the answer will match the length of the question. It might avoid the crosstalk and have for a more orderly meeting. I bring that out only to be helpful.
No, I think MP Lawrence, what would avoid the crosstalk is crosstalk. So, like, we just stop with the crosstalk, allow for, you could pose a question, you could be as long as you want in the question, and then allow the minister to answer that question. So, MP Baker.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chair, and Minister, thank you for being with us here today. Just before I ask my first question, I do need to say that I am incredibly disappointed with what I've just heard from MP Halan and the Conservatives. Mr. Halan suggested that the minister has refused to appear. We knew weeks ago the minister indicated she would be here today and available to appear. And instead of moving on, the Conservatives have spent the last 23 hours of this committee's time, which could have been used to study the budget, could have been focused on making it better, addressing any concerns that they have, serving Canadians. Instead, they spent it filibustering, talking about everything but what needed to be discussed, and filibustering a motion about the minister's appearance that we already knew was going to happen. So first of all, it's not true that the minister said she wasn't willing to appear. In fact, she did indicate weeks ago she was willing to. And now, the minister is here, and instead of actually listening to what the minister has to say, the member across has the audacity to not listen, interrupt the minister, heckle me, instead of listening to what the minister has to say. I think this just shows that the Conservatives are completely uninterested in hearing what the minister has to say, that this has nothing to do with having a substantive conversation about the budget, how we can improve the lives of Canadians. It has everything to do with scoring political points and obstructionism, and I think it's too bad. It's really disappointing. So, Minister, first of all, I want to move to the questions that I had to ask you. First of all, I want to thank you for your continued support, hard work, and collaboration in supporting the brave people of Ukraine. And in the last budget, we earmarked $2.4 billion in support for Ukraine. I have several questions as part of that. The first is, how does this support compare to the support that was included in Budget 2022, so the prior year's budget? What would you say to those who have concerns that the $2.4 billion is less than the over $5 billion we spent to support Ukraine in 2022? We actually spent in 2022. And I believe Canada has been a global leader in the support of Ukraine. How does our support compare to peer nations?
Well, thank you very much for the question. And just to your preamble, Ivana, Mr. Baker, I share your disappointment in the behavior specifically of the Conservatives. I guess none of us should be surprised because Canada's economy is really strong. And I think Clearly, the Conservatives simply don't want to have a substantive discussion about the strength of our economy, about Canada's outstanding performance relative to our G7 peers on all indicators, on jobs, on fiscal performance, on growth. But I'm happy to talk about it. I'm also really happy to talk about Ukraine. And while we do disagree about many things in this committee, I hope that something we can agree about in this committee and in the House of Commons is the paramount existential importance of the war in Ukraine. So I hope that's something we can all support. And I do want to assure the Canadians who are listening that as Canadians, as a country, we can be proud of the role our country is playing in supporting the incredibly brave people of Ukraine. On a per capita basis, when it comes to financial support, direct budget support to the government of Ukraine, which continues to function, which is paying pensions, which is rebuilding that electricity grid that gets pounded every night by Russia, Canada, on a per capita basis in the G7, is contributing the most to support Ukraine. I think we should all be really proud of that. Canada is also a world leader when it comes to our sanctions regime, when it comes to our actions to seize and to confiscate assets. And I do actually want to thank all members of this committee, all members of the House, because it was in our BIA implementation bill last spring that Canada improved our legislation, allowing us to have the world's strongest asset seizure and confiscation regime. That is something other countries of the world are looking to. That is something that sanctions Russia, that deters Russia, and it is something that supports Ukraine.
Thank you, Minister. I have about 60 seconds left, so I'll be brief in my question, and I'll give you a little bit of time to answer if I can. Over the last couple of weeks, as I mentioned earlier, instead of studying the Budget Implementation Act and working to propose enhancements or improvements to the bill, the Conservatives have filibustered this committee for over 23 hours, and that's limited our ability to hear from witnesses, from Canadians who can provide input on how we can improve the bill and the impact that it would have on Canadians. If they continue to filibuster, if the Conservatives continue to filibuster our consideration of the Budget Implementation Act, this will delay its passage. What have been the impact of their filibuster tactics to date, and what will they be if they continue? And we have about 30 seconds.
Two things. One, it prevents the committee from having the substantive discussions that I think everyone here as a parliamentarian wants to have and that Canadians need us to be having. And second, it delays our ability to deliver on really important things that I think we can all agree on, like an anti-flipping tax, like a tradespeople tool deduction, like delivering the Canada Workers' Benefit in advance. Those are things we should be able to agree on, and we should be working together to get them to Canadians.
I agree. Thank you, Minister.
And thank you, MP Baker. Minister, now we are going to hear from the bloc. MP Samari, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, Minister. I have many questions. My first is about companies that contacted us and are very worried about some measures in C-47. These are companies that manage large servers on very high-speed fiber networks. Sometimes, among their clients, there are mining activities, either here in Canada or abroad. In C-47, as we understand it, and was confirmed by the officials, when there's an export of the service for a mining activity, the company is no longer considered as doing business that allows them to deduct the input sales tax. So they'd have to assume those taxes. It removes competition. And one concern we have is all the taxes. Since sales taxes are higher in Quebec than in Alberta, for instance, there'd be an incentive to displace the activity to a place where energy comes from fossil fuels. Can you reassure the industry? Are there mitigating measures? What are the solutions about this, and what's your opinion on this? Thank you. Thank you for the questions. Very concrete and serious ones, and I appreciate that approach enormously. And I want to assure you, Mr. Sainte-Marie, that my team and I are always prepared to continue this discussion because these are major issues that you've raised. I won't have time to answer each part of your question, but I'll try to respond to a few points. With regard to the difference between the provinces and trade around Canada, that's an excellent point. We have to continue to work on this. I believe that we could really help our country's economic growth by taking measures to have more open commerce across the country. You're right when it comes to net zero. We have to be really careful to have a truly national approach. That is our government's approach. And we continue to be ready to continue the work with you in all the provinces, of course, including Quebec, in order to improve that aspect. With regard to the specific points about taxes, I'd like to assure you first and foremost that we are prepared to continue a direct dialogue with you with all the details. And when it comes to digitalization, as you know, this is an issue that our government cares very much about internationally, with our work with the OECD, with our work that my colleague Pablo Rodriguez is doing by supporting Canadian culture. I know there are elements of your question that I haven't responded to, but you asked a complicated question, and I will give you back the floor to continue your questions. Thank you very much. Perhaps we could contact one another concerning the issue of deducting sales taxes when there's exports of mining activities. My second question, before you tabled C-47 in the House, C-46 was adopted at all stages, doubling the GST credit, $2 billion for healthcare. The next day, we got C-47. The measures are in there. And in the press release accompanying the revealing of C-47, you congratulated yourself because we'd adopted C-46. We see an additional $2 billion for healthcare in C-47. I agree with that because the agreement made with the provinces does not meet the needs, in our opinion. So I understood from the government, from your colleagues, there'd be an amendment to C-47 to withdraw that $2 billion and only keep the one in C-46. Is the fact that that $2 billion was withdrawn will be something that leads to a confidence vote? Okay, thank you for the question. I must say that we see the obstructionist approach by the Conservatives, given that we should be glad that we went ahead with the grocery refund and the money for medical care, and that we decided to separate those essential measures, because I think that our healthcare system and the most vulnerable among us need help now. We understand the Conservatives' approach, and that is why I appreciate the decision by all members to go ahead with those very important measures. We did that, and that's a good thing. Thank you. Thank you, Minister. I will answer during the next round if you want.
MP Blakey and the NDP, please, for 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Welcome, Minister. One of the things that the Budget Implementation Act is it empowers the Public Sector Pension Investment Board to incorporate a subsidiary to manage the growth fund. One of the things New Democrats have argued forcefully for, in partnership with folks like Gil McGowan at the Alberta Federation of Labour, is to have 2 seats for Labour at the table making decisions about growth fund investments. I understand that these are initial steps. There's more consultation to do on the exact governance structure of the growth fund, but was looking to ask around what the government's expected timeline is to present legislating those 2 seats at the growth fund table for Labour representatives.
So thank you very much for the question. And I'm glad you mentioned Gil, our mutual friend. And it's a nice opportunity for me to really give him and organized labor credit for the work that they have done in building this budget. And as you know, this budget, and in particular the green industrial policy in this budget, takes unprecedented action to ensure that the policies here include workers, include unionized workers, include guarantees of good paying jobs. That's a first in Canada. Gil was a very essential person in figuring that out. I absolutely agree with you on the importance of worker representation at the Growth Fund. And the first step there, as you know, in the budget, we announced that we're going to consult unions this spring on adding 2 seats to the PSP Investment Board of Directors for representatives of organized labor. As you know, it is the PSP that is in charge of managing the Growth Fund, and we're aiming to legislate this change in the fall of 2023.
Okay, thank you very much. I did, just by way of kind of participating, I guess, in the preambulatory remarks about your presence at committee, I do think, there is a standing invitation for you to appear quarterly. We've seen the Governor of Bank of Canada come. There's invitations in the context of the study on inflation. And, we've spent a fair bit of time around this table arguing about an extra hour of your presence. And I would encourage you in the future to consider committing to come for the full 2 hours, because I certainly would have much preferred to spend the last 23 hours listening to Canadians about their own thoughts and views about the content of the Budget Implementation Act, and instead listen to Conservative colleagues around the table. But I think some more generosity with your time at this table may help us overcome some of these challenges, because your presence has become, unfortunately, an issue in respect to the well-functioning of this committee. And I think it's Canadians that are missing out, because we do have an important job to do around this table. And conflicts about your presence or lack thereof are definitely getting in the way of that work. So anything you can do to facilitate better operations at this committee table, I think would certainly be welcome from me. I won't speak for others, although I imagine be welcome from those who spent so much time beseeching your presence. And I would certainly remind them how much time they spent trying to get you here and encourage them to use the time well, instead of continuing the bickering that we've seen for so long, now that we do have an opportunity to talk to you about the legislation. In that spirit, I want to come back to an issue that you've heard me talk about before, and that I've asked you about before, and that I'm concerned the government hasn't taken the opportunity in the BIA to address, which is the allocation of $25 billion of CERB debt to the employment insurance account. Your government has been promising since 2015 meaningful EI modernization. In fact, we saw it during the pandemic, because the EI program was so inadequate, that it couldn't bear the burden placed on it by the pandemic. Without much notice, your government canceled those temporary measures in September, and I think most people thought that meant that a significant modernization of EI was in the wings. Not only has that not happened, but it seems to me that, asking EI ratepayers, both employers and employees, to pay off $25 billion of CERB debt that doesn't properly belong on the EI account means that the government's wings are clipped in respect of meaningful EI modernization, because the room that would have gone toward contributing towards a higher income replacement rate, towards the cost of having a universal lower hours threshold, things of that nature, are instead going to pay down CERB debt, which should be happening off the general ledger. So I'm wondering if you want to take what time I have remaining to give a little bit of an explanation as to why it is government is dead set on having EI ratepayers pay off a significant chunk of CERB debt instead of using that room within the premium to improve the program.
Minister, you've got about 30 seconds or so. Yep.
Okay. Well, in that case, I'm going to go to your first point, Mr. Blakey, and I very much appreciate your effort to pour oil on the troubled waters of this committee. One thing that I learned...
As long as it's not subsidized oil. It's important to say.
Canadian oil. One thing, maybe canola oil. One thing that I learned during the NAFTA negotiations is that appeasing a bully never works, and that tends to be my approach in life. I've also seen nothing in the conduct of these Conservatives, and I would contrast that, for example, with the behavior of former finance critic Ed Fast, to show actually a serious desire to engage on the serious economic issues before our country. You may be more trusting than I am, but I've learned from experience. I'm delighted to be here today because the Canadian economy is strong, and I'm happy to talk about that.
Thank you, and thank you, MP Blakey and Minister. And now we are on to our second round. This will be our final round, and we've got the Conservatives up. MP Morantz for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Minister, in this budget, there is an additional $798 million in new unannounced spending. There's now $12 billion in total non-announced spending, for which you provided no specific details. I'm wondering if you would table with the committee the details of the spending.
Thanks for the question. And in the budget, we provide extensive details on the spending and on its composition. And, there have been some areas, for example, the very important investment in Volkswagen, where for reasons of commercial confidence and ensuring Canada's attractiveness as an investment destination.
The non-announced spending, though. Could you give us the details?
In the budget itself,
what do you table?
Had to be careful. As you know, when it comes to Volkswagen, we have now offered the full details, and we continue to work on attracting other investments of that kind because Canada needs it.
All right, no details on the non-announced spending, I take it. On November 3rd, in the fall economic statement, you said that by 2028, there would be a $4.5 billion surplus. That was only 144 days before you tabled the budget. In the budget, that same table in 27-28 showed a $14 billion deficit, so an $18.5 billion swing in that year. How could you or your department officials have been so wrong just 144 days earlier by being out by $18.5 billion in the 27-28 forecast?
So, MP Morantz, I respect you too much to not know that you understand very much how the budget projections are built. But maybe some Canadians listening will have been misled by your question. So let me explain something very
With the greatest
elementary.
respect, it's not misleading. It's in the table.
No, but let me be
Just to
clear.
get
Take exception
Minister
to, I
and,
don't
and MP
mislead
Morantz,
people,
just
Minister.
MP Morantz,
I'm
just,
telling
I
you
said
what's in
people
your
may
own
have
budget.
been misled by your question.
just allow for the
Not-
answer
no, I
to
disagree.
be.
But anyway,
MP
proceed.
Okay. Allow for the answer, and then MP Morantz, you'll have the floor. Go ahead.
So the truth is that Canada's budgetary practice, going back to the early 80s, is actually really smart. And it's nothing to do with me and this particular government. It's how all budgets have been done since then. The fiscal projections, the sort of the base scenario, what we believe is going to happen to growth, to inflation, to the price of oil, those kind of key components, they are not figured out by smart finance officials like the people sitting with me. They come from the projections of private sector economists and the average of their projections.
No answer, unfortunately, on that.
No,
Mr. Chair.
there actually is an answer.
I have to allow it for a conclusion. So,
Yeah.
Minister,
Chair, she's
if
had
you could
much-
just,
she's had
Minister, if you
much
could.
more-
I'll wrap up
Sorry,
quickly.
point of order.
Just point of order, MP Morantz.
The minister on this question has had at least twice as much time now than I took to ask the question. I would like my time back so I can move on.
MP
to my
Morantz,
next question.
I did not look at the time, I'll be honest with
I've
you.
been looking
But
at
just allow the minister just to conclude, and we'll get to your question. And yeah. Minister,
The basic point is the projections of private sector economists about the direction of the Canadian economy changed significantly between September of this year and September of last year and the beginning of this year, and that led to a
Mr.
meaningful
Chair,
swing in the
she's not answered the
underlying.
question. She's
Thank you,
gone on
Minister.
for at least
MP Morantz,
4
go ahead.
times. Point of order.
Point of order.
Just, I want to make it clear. The idea is we ask a question and the response is roughly the same amount. It doesn't speak to the second, but her response was 3 or 4 times longer than my question. So I'd like some time back so I can ask.
well, MP Morantz, you have time right now. We did pause the time,
I know
so
we
you
do
have an
for a point of
opportunity.
order, but I think we need to solve this problem.
Point of order, Chair.
Point of order, MP Baker.
Chair, the Conservatives are asking questions of the minister on topics that are complex and require the minister time to be able to answer them. And it shouldn't be hard for the Conservatives to understand that.
It would be nice to
And I think it is. They have not only, in this particular case, the minister took more time to respond to the question than Mr. Morantz took in asking it, but in most of the cases so far, what has happened is they've taken time to ask the question, and before the minister's had equal time, they've interrupted and heckled her. So I would ask you, Chair, to allow the
On that
minister
point of
to...
order,
Okay, thank you, MP Baker. Just on these points of order, I'll just let all the members know, just MP Morantz, just allow me to just, for the entire committee here and the minister and all those watching, if you go back and look at all our meetings, I have actually been very flexible on time. And I do allow for time for questions, so MP Morantz, on that, just what you could take from that comment that I just made was I am very flexible on time.
Oh, thank you.
So yeah, and so you should just take from that, and get on to your question, and yeah, we'll hear from the minister, and then we'll take this opportunity. We have this opportunity right now. Let's seize it.
And in that spirit, I would like to cede the rest of my time to my colleague, Mr. Perkins.
MP Perkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Minister. If I take it from the last answer, the blame is on the bank economists, not you, for spending too much money. But I'll go on to my question. I think earlier you said in response to the $12 billion of unallocated spending that's in this budget, that's to cover things like the Volkswagen $13 billion production subsidy. Could I ask how a production subsidy gets paid in this fiscal year when the plant's not built?
So let me respond by asking what the position of the Conservative Party is on our investments.
Sorry to interrupt, Mr. Chair, but that wasn't my question. So since you won't answer the question about the $13 billion, your colleague, the Minister of Industry, and yourselves were very bullish on this contract. The minister has said that there is an ROI report that says within 5 years there will be a return on investment on the $14 billion. Will you table that report with this committee, since the minister in Industry Committee basically said he didn't know where the report was?
The minister of Industry is a fantastic colleague, and I am very glad to be working with him on bringing investment to Canada. And what Canadians deserve to know is what is the view of the Conservative Party on bringing these essential investments to Canada. Canadians support what we're doing.
MP Perkins, we're past time. I was going to allow the minister, as I said, I'm flexible time to allow the minister to answer, and then we are moving on to the next questioner.
We'll answer.
Yeah, so allow the minister to answer, and then we're moving on to MP Zarowitz, minister.
I think I have answered. We believe in attracting investment to Canada, and Canadians support that. I think Canadians would like to know what the position of the Conservative Party is on that essential issue.
Okay, thank you, MP Morantz, MP Perkins, and now to MP Zarowitz, please, for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Deputy Prime Minister, Minister of Finance, for joining us today. Before I get to my first question, I just wanted to address two things. One is the very thoughtful comments that Mr. Blakey had mentioned just around you visiting this committee. I just want to mention and put it on record that you have visited us at least 4 times during this Parliament, and you've always shown up for every single BIA. And I think it's important for Canadians to be reminded of that. The other thing I wanted to address is just a comment that Mr. Hallam had mentioned about out-of-control spending. I think sometimes because so much happens in our lives, we have short memories, but we have come out of an unprecedented global pandemic. And then as we came out of it, we had an extraordinarily changed geopolitical situation. And I will tell you, and I'll remind Canadians, our government absolutely spent a large amount of money. We did that because we had to help Canadians get through COVID. The spending has saved lives. The spending has saved livelihoods. The spending has saved businesses. And it's provided a foundation from which our economy has pivoted. And so we have pivoted, and this is why at this moment we do have the best debt to GDP ratio of the G7 countries. We've had more than a full recovery of jobs, and we continue to maintain our AAA credit rating, among other things. So I wanted to just put that on the record. So to my first question, in my riding of Davenport, as is the case of many ridings, there's a number of advocate groups. So I have a huge contingent, and I'm one of them, by the way, of climate activists and people who really want our government to move as quickly as possible to achieving our Paris Accord targets and to meeting our net zero by 2050 targets. I also have an equally important active group that are very passionate about making sure we continue to have good jobs and we continue to have a strong economy, because it's not only that they care about themselves, but they care about their kids and that their kids have a strong future. So my question to you is, can you explain to the residents of Davenport why it's important for us to invest in the clean economy with such substantial investment via tax credits that were announced in Federal Budget 2023, what it means for the Canadian economy moving forward, and how does this help us achieve our net zero by 2050 target?
Okay, well, first of all, thank you for the important point about the investments our government has made in Canadians and about the strength of Canada's fiscal position. It's really important for us all to be clear about that so that Canadians understand the reality and are not misled by fiscal scaremongering. On the clean economy and climate action, I'm very happy to speak through you directly to the people of Davenport. As you know, our ridings are neighbors, so your constituents are my neighbors. And I also thank you for your energetic advocacy of our government's climate agenda. And I agree with you. We should all be climate activists. I think, when people look back on the budget that we are all ultimately going to pass, I think what history is going to show is that this was the budget that really kicked Canada's green industrial transformation into high gear with a worker-led agenda. I really, really believe that. And, through some of the unpleasantness, I just remind myself that we're doing that important work together. With this budget, our government has now put forward a $120 billion green industrial policy. This is going to accelerate our work on reducing Canada's emissions, and crucially, it's going to create a lot of great jobs. And I was really happy. 3 things made me really happy after the budget. One was S&P reiterating our AAA rating with a stable outlook, an important proof point. The second was TD coming up with a judgment about our budget and saying Canada has done it. We are now totally competitive as an investment destination when it comes to the clean economy. And the third was Rystad Energy, a highly respected energy analytical firm, coming to exactly the same judgment of what Canada has done.
Thank you, and thank you, MP Zerowitz. It is the time. It goes quickly, and we have MP Sainte-Marie now for 2.5 minutes, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have 2 questions about the $80 billion we discussed for the green economy. The management of this is given to 2 institutions, so it's out of Parliament's control. So what the department told us is that there's a lot of money to support the oil industry, a lot of money for the nuclear industry. We see that Quebec has a certain amount, but I was a bit jealous, I must say, when I saw the investments for Stellantis and Volkswagen. I would have liked us to have that kind of structural investment in Quebec. So my 2 questions are this. Can you, this afternoon, before this committee, guarantee that Quebec will get its fair share, given its population? And the second question is, why take that amount out of parliamentary control? Thank you. Well, the answer to the first question is absolutely clear, yes. And I want to repeat that. Yes, Quebec will get its fair share, and all provinces, all regions of Canada will get their fair share of our investments in the green economy. It's a very important issue to my mind. And I appreciate that question because you've given me an opportunity to reassure you and all Canadians that this regional equity in green investment is very important to me personally. And I also want to ensure you, regarding Quebec, we have close cooperation with the province of Quebec. And right now we're discussing how we could implement our green plan for Quebec. I greatly appreciate Quebec's approach and the approach of Quebecers themselves when it comes to the green economy. They are activists. The federal government will be there to help them and invest more in this transition. And I'd be very pleased to work directly with you to do that important job. Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Mr. Sainte-Marie.
MP Blakey, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And I do just want to come back to the employment insurance question that you didn't have time to answer before. Pre-pandemic, we had an inadequate EI system and premiums that were designed to adequately fund the inadequate system. Then during the pandemic, we had temporary changes. I don't think it was ever envisioned that the premium structure that was in place for the inadequate system before the pandemic would be able to fund the changes of the pandemic. Now we're back to having the inadequate system, but a retroactive burden on ratepayers to try and make up for what was spent during the course of the pandemic on an EI system that was nothing like what the premiums were designed to pay. So I would like an explanation as to why it is the government thinks it's appropriate to back charge the EI system for what was, we hope, a once in a generation or longer event, and how the government intends to fund a meaningful modernization of employment insurance while the account is trying to pay back that debt.
Okay, well, thank you for the question, which is important and complicated. And I want to start where you started by saying that I believe, as Julie pointed out, that both the EI system and CRA, together with a government and a parliament that had the will to do it, I think we really managed to be there for Canadians during the pandemic. It's something that I'm proud of. I think it saved lives because it allowed us to do the right thing when it came to health. And I think it also rescued a lot of families and people. So it cost a lot of money, but it was the right thing to do. I'm glad we did it. In terms of what we do going forward, I am very glad that our government resisted in the summer and fall of last year irresponsible pressure from the Conservatives to cut contributions to EI and the CPP. Those would have impoverished the systems that working Canadians and Canadian seniors depend on. And I want to remind members of this committee and Canadians listening that fiscally irresponsible policy was advocated aggressively by the Conservatives. We held firm. I'm proud that we did. And I'm proud that that both contributes to our overall fiscal responsibility as a government, but also to the fiscal sustainability of these two essential systems, EI and CPP. In terms of EI modernization, as you know, this budget takes some important steps in that direction in terms of the seasonal work. As you also know, our government has extended the number of weeks people can get on EI for sick leave, and I am very supportive of that. I do think there's more work to do on EI modernization. It's a very complicated system, and I think it's really important for us to approach EI modernization with the appropriate degree of care, and that is what we intend to do.
Thank you, Minister. MP Blakey. Now to MP Chambers for 5 minutes.
Nice to see you again, Minister. Thank you for coming. Can you tell the committee and Canadians how much we're spending or projected to spend on interest on the debt this upcoming fiscal year? Just looking for the number.
Let me just say, because I think it's important to put things in context, that in both...
Minister, my time is very limited. I'm asking if you know the number. You have a lot of officials beside you. Will you tell Canadians how much we're going to spend on servicing the debt next year?
Here's what I think, that it's really important to put numbers in context. Without context, numbers are meaningless. Our debt service charges are low in Canada's historical context, and they are low compared to what our peers in the G7
Thank you for the context. What's the gross dollar value we're going to spend on interest on the debt next year?
And let me again, I really am opposed to fiscal fear-mongering by the Conservatives. And so the important point to make for Canadians is that in historic context, our debt service charges are reasonable and sustainable,
respectfully,
and
Minister,
lower than they have been in many previous years. That's why S&P reaffirmed our AAA rating.
I'm asking, will you tell Canadians how much we're spending on the debt? It's in black and white in your book. Do you just not want to say?
I think that it's important to put all numbers in context.
Thank you, Minister. I'll move to the next question.
And do you not agree that in historic context, our debt service charges are absolutely handleable?
Minister, how much are we projecting to send to the provinces for health care this year coming up? Again, looking for the number.
I'm very glad to hear the Conservatives talk about health care. As you know, our government made in this budget a historic investment of nearly $200 billion in healthcare.
Okay, I'm gonna.
As we discussed with Mr. Saint-Marie, thanks to unanimous consent of the House, we're sending right away $2 billion to the provinces to meet
you,
immediate needs.
I'm not really sure how to proceed. We either ask a question that has a definitive fact-based answer and we don't get a response, or we ask a philosophical question. The truth is we're going to spend about $43 or $45 billion on servicing the debt next year. We're projecting to spend the provinces for healthcare about $47 billion. We're spending almost as much on servicing the debt as we are spending on healthcare in this country. It bothers me that we're not willing to admit this. For some reason, we don't want to discuss that actual fact when it was this government, and you in particular, that said it would be irresponsible not to spend because interest rates are so low. When you have a party, you have to pay the band, and we're now seeing you have to pay the band. So if we can't answer the fact-based question, I'll ask the philosophical question. Do you consider yourself a Keynesian?
I consider myself a liberal.
Okay.
And I consider myself a fiscally responsible finance minister who has found the balance that Canada needs between compassion, between investments in our economic capacity, while maintaining a strong fiscal position. And since we are discussing economic philosophy, which I actually think is the really correct and meaningful subject of discussion of this committee, I do think there is a clear philosophical difference between Conservatives and Liberals when it comes to the Canadian economy right now.
We've been hearing that all.
We believe in investing in healthcare.
I have one final question.
We believe in investing in childcare. We believe in investing in the green transition.
I have one final question.
If the Conservatives don't agree to do that,
Minister
they should be clear.
and MP Chambers, please, no crosstalk. And MP Chambers, I know you're always very strict on your time, but I am allowing flexibility with your time. Yeah.
So many people in this room in the government have said, they like Keynes. Everyone gets the first part, which is in a downturn or in their economic uncertainty, we must spend. But they always forget the second part, which is you have to pay the money back. And through an entire cycle, we haven't paid any money back. The government said it was just going to run a couple small deficits when it started. And now they're as far as the eye can see. So I appreciate that you've come here to committee today. We've, I think, some good suggestions from Mr. Blakey. Part of the reasons we're having trouble is, we've asked you to come on a couple different occasions, at least quarterly until inflation comes back down. So I'm just going to ask, will you return when the governor returns to this committee to answer more questions specifically about inflation as that invitation has been made? Can we count on you coming back when the governor comes back?
So you've made a whole bunch of assertions, and I'm going to take them one by one.
And run out.
On fiscal responsibility, as I said, I think there is a real, genuine difference of view between the Conservatives and the Liberals. We believe in investing Canada and in Canadians. We believe in investing in our country's economic capacity, and we believe in investing in the green transition. I don't think the Conservatives believe in that, although the Conservatives have refused to put forward a positive economic policy, so it's hard to tell.
Respectfully, Minister, the question is will you come back to the committee? And that's the question.
Okay, so anyway, time is now well past, but
so it's not well past.
So we will now, we're going to move to actually our final questioner, and that will be
Minister an opportunity to respond to this simple question
Time
whether
is
she's
over.
coming
to
back.
MP McDonald. Yes.
Thank you, Chair. And, Chair, maybe I'm the last speaker, I don't know, but I'm sitting here listening, and my honourable member, who I have the utmost respect for, calling COVID a party. I'm not sure in his province, but it sure as hell wasn't a party in my province. And I want to thank the minister, and I want to thank the government for the investments that you did make in healthcare, because there's not a person on Prince Edward Island, which I represent, that would refute the investments that we're making in healthcare. Our economy has shown resilience against many shocks, including the illegal invasion of Ukraine and COVID-19, both of which have placed many external pressures on our economy and our economies globally. But, you look at the fiscal responsibility of Budget 2023 and the targeted spend that you created, and you listen to people like the Bank of Governor and his response, and the Parliamentary Budget Officer, and the Bank of Governor before the Bank of Governor that is there today, and many economists, and they all say the same thing. If Canada wasn't in a position that we were in prior to COVID-19, we wouldn't likely be having these conversations here today. So you're going to go down in the history books as being a tremendous Minister of Finance who took this country through tumultuous times. But back to healthcare, and I want to be quick on healthcare. I was pleased, obviously, with the investments and the targeted investments. But, can you just expand on what are those investments going to do to the provinces?
Yeah, I sure can. And, I do think once we got past some of the sound and fury, we have been getting to in this conversation today some of the really important philosophical and policy choices that are before Canadians right now. And I think the big choice is, do you believe in investing in Canada, investing in our social welfare system and our economic capacity while maintaining a fiscally responsible path, or do you not support those investments? I really think at the end of the day, that's the economic political choice before Canadians. And the answer for me is 100% clear. We do need to find a balance between fiscal responsibility and compassion. S&P tells me we've done the fiscally responsible side of that. And we have also made the investments we need to keep the Canadian economy going, to keep Canadians healthy and safe, starting with the investment in healthcare. And, going back to the fiscal responsibility issue that we were discussing a minute ago, I really think the Conservatives have to look themselves in the mirror and ask, how can they talk about fiscal responsibility when they were calling for us to cut EI premiums and to cut our contributions to the CPP? That is not fiscal responsibility. That is fiscal recklessness. Our government believes in doing the tough things that you need to do to make compassionate investments in Canadians and to be fiscally responsible. That's what this budget does. We're going to keep on doing that.
Yes. I'm Chair. Is that?
You've got 2 more minutes. Oh, a minute and a half. Yeah.
Just a quick point of order.
Yes.
I would like to invite the minister to stay for an extra hour. I think she's acquitted herself very well today, and I think that she, as well as the rest of the committee, would do well by having her for another hour.
It is not a point of order. Yes, MP Lawrence. So the minister is. We've got a minute and a half. Yeah, with MP McDonald.
Cede my time to my colleague.
Okay. So MP Chattel for the last minute and a half.
Merci, cher collègue. Merci aussi.
Thank you, dear colleague. If there hadn't been all these points of order, maybe I would have been entitled to a question, so don't be too disappointed. Madam Minister, thank you for coming here today. Even though we can no longer invite you officially, thank you for coming. One very important measure in the budget were amendments to the anti-avoidance rules. We talk a lot about fiscal prudence, but we have to ensure the integrity of our tax system for Canadians. So could you talk about the importance of those measures? Yes, of course. Thank you for the question. Ms. Chattel, I greatly appreciate your expertise as an economist, as a former official of the Department of Finance. Your former colleagues are here with us today, and they're here with you. Yes, I'm totally persuaded of the importance of our fair and equitable tax system. We've talked about the importance of investment in the Canadian economy, in the green economy, in healthcare. To do those investments, we need revenue. And to have revenue, we have to have a fair and effective tax system. I want to thank my colleague here and his team. We have closed a few tax loopholes, and that's very important. That's another reason why we have to put an end to political games and do our jobs. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Chattel.
Much, Minister Freeland, for appearing before our committee and your officials. Thank you for being with us and for answering many of the members' questions. I do see your hand up, and yeah, Minister Freeland?
Yeah. You know, I was taught as a child in Sunday school, like many of us, that blessed are the peacemakers. And, you know, much as I really believe appeasing bullies is a mistake, that's an important lesson, too. And so really in response to the peacemaking plea of Mr. Blakey, of Daniel, if people have the time and the energy, I'd be happy to hang out for as much time as the committee has available today. Before question period. I'll have to leave at question period. I'll have to leave at question period, but between now and question period, I'm happy to talk some more. If your talking points haven't run out, gentlemen.
So, Minister Freeland, that's gracious of you, and I have conferred with the clerk that we do have till 1:30, so that's another almost 20 minutes, members. So if members are good with that, I will divide the time then equally, and if we could stretch that a few minutes past that, maybe, clerk? Yeah. Okay. So it'll be about 5 minutes per party. We'll do it that way. Is that how? That's how we usually do it. So we'll start with the Conservatives for 5 minutes, and then yeah.
And could we just have a footnote here? Credit to Mr. Blakey for his peacemaking efforts. He's the guy who won me over.
I'm sure the analysts, I'm sure, have captured that.
Absolutely. Yeah. And thank you to Daniel. The fitting, there should be a biblical reference with Daniel being the son of a preacher man and a regular peacemaker on this campaign. And I actually want to start with a thank you too. I'm going to tell tales a little bit out of school. I hope you don't mind, Minister. But you met me and my kids.
What the tales are.
You met me and my kids in the elevator, and my kids were at the end of the day and a little wrangly, but you were incredibly kind to them, and I'm sure that you've made a memory for them. So thank you for that. But it's on that very issue that I do want to talk to you a little bit about, right? So I come from riding Northumberland, Peterborough South, right on the 401. If you're driving between Toronto and Ottawa, you'll go through our riding there, and so we have a number of food banks in our riding, and you can look at the numbers, 1.5 million across Canada. But I've actually been to those food banks, and I've seen children there, and it's not a pretty picture of where Canada is. And You've pointed out a number of times that the economy is roaring, is great. Do you not see some of the issues that are actually forecasted in your own budget? You actually forecast 300,000 Canadians will lose their job this year. That inflation will still stay relatively high at over 4%. We also have structural problems in our economy too, with respect to productivity decreasing. We also have the OECD predicting our per capita GDP growth to be 0.7%, which will be the lowest in all of the OECD. And so I would love to share your optimism, but do you not also share some of my concerns that we have as we have record food bank usage, forecasted unemployment increases, and structural challenges such as our productivity and innovation gap?
Thank you for that important and serious question. And please say hi to your kids. They were very charming, and they cheered me up at the end of a busy day. And, you know, as you guys know, as a champion of early learning and childcare and the Canada Child Benefit, no, like I am like the most I'm a mother of 3. I think we're all pro-family, but I really believe in supporting Canadian kids and Canadian families. And that, by the way, includes the kids of people here. And our kids do all make sacrifices. They have interesting lives, but they make sacrifices. So I was glad to say hi to your kids. Like, to your core question, of course I worry. Like, it's agonizing for me. And there's a food bank at the end of my street. It's actually at my local church, the Church of the Messiah, where we go. And when I can, I go there on a Wednesday to help out. There are now quite a few people who don't speak English, Ukrainians, who are there. And, like, I'm sorry, like, it breaks my heart. You know, people in my congregation ask me to come when I can so I can speak Ukrainian to the people. And there was one family, like a grandmother and a mother, and, like, the food at the food bank, it's great, but it's kind of like a mixed bag. And there was food that they didn't really know. Like, there happened to be like a panettone, which they hadn't seen before, and also lots of taco stuff. And this mother and grandmother were like, well, you know, this is sort of interesting. Maybe we can find a way to give it to the kids for lunch. And I talked to them, and the dad is in Ukraine fighting on the front line. And I said to them, I'm so sorry. Like, I'm sorry this has happened to you, and I am so sorry that it's so hard. And they said to me, please don't be sorry. Like, we're just grateful that we're here in Canada, and we're safe, and that we can get these interesting foods we've never eaten before and give them to our kids for lunch. Amazing people. I would love to live in a Canada where there are. I'll finish on the food bank quickly. I don't mean I'm not trying to run the clock here.
Minister.
Really.
I'm not completely.
No, seriously. Like, I would love. I think. Look, we disagree about lots of stuff. I would love to live in a Canada where we didn't have any food banks. One of the reasons that I am glad that we separated the grocery rebate from everything else is it means we can get that money to people by the 5th of July. And the people who get that rebate really, really need it. Is that money going to support every single person in Canada as much as I would like, as much as you would like? Like, look, I know we disagree about a lot of stuff. I think we are all people here of goodwill. I think all of us want there to be no single child in Canada that goes to bed hungry tonight, and there will be some. Would I like to be able to give checks to everybody so no one goes hungry tonight? I would love it. But I actually, and I know Conservatives don't really believe this, but you should, I believe in fiscal responsibility too. Okay. And what I have tried to do in this budget and what I tried to do last year is find that balance between compassion and fiscal responsibility.
Okay, so thank you. We're at time, but MP Lawrence, you want to make a quick comment? Okay, go ahead.
It'll be 15 seconds.
Yeah.
So thank you for appearing. And like I said, I think you've acquitted yourself very well today, and I would invite you to come back. I'll just make one quick comment. The difference between Liberals and Conservatives is Liberals, and I believe this, you want to give checks to everyone who needs them. I don't want anyone to need a check.
All right. Okay. Thank you. We are now going to the Liberals, and I've got MP Chattel, please.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'm a Liberal, and I agree with the idea that we shouldn't be giving a check to everyone. There shouldn't be a need for it, and that's why we're growing the economy. So I don't think my colleague is being quite fair saying that. Now, Minister, as you mentioned, I spent a lot of time, 20 years in taxation and international taxation, and I've seen many, many cases of tax avoidance. I worked in the private sector and in the public sector as well. We've lost hundreds of billions of dollars in taxes with various schemes over the 20 years of my career in this area. Treaty shopping, for instance, if I look at Alta Resources, the company, a foreign company here that exploits our natural resources, obtained $380 million in income that was not taxed in Canada using our natural resources. Now we're talking about $8 billion sheltered from tax for foreign companies that exploit our natural resources. That represents hospitals, housing, infrastructure that we can't have because we're deprived of that revenue. You were talking about food banks. We could have a situation when we can fund more food banks or fund them better. There are two things in the budget that will really help, and I congratulate you for your courage, because it takes courage to impose discipline. And these major international corporations that don't want to pay tax in Canada, well, you grab the bull by the horns here. Thank you. The first thing is Pillar 2 of the OECD. We were talking about your trips to the G7 and G20. Well, your leadership meant that international companies will pay minimum tax of 15% wherever they are in the world. And that's the work you're doing at the OECD on Pillar 2. But what I'd like to hear you talk about is more specifically about your plans to change the general anti-avoidance rules that are in the little supplement. That's a good reference point for me. That's what I read directly. And the general anti-avoidance rules means that you propose significant changes that are underway. I'd like to hear you about the process. Are we going to see that in BIA number 2? Where is the consultation process at? I've read your proposed amendments, and it's greatly appreciated. Ms. Châtel, with your permission, at the outset, I'd like to finish my answer to Mr. Lawrence's important question, if you'll allow me.
Agree. I want a Canada where everyone has a great job or a great pension because they've worked hard all their life. And in fact, that is why I believe so strongly in some investments we're making in this budget and we've made in previous budgets. That's why I believe in our investment in early learning and childcare. It is not only great for kids who have great childcare, it's great for parents who can go out and get a job, especially mothers, and support their families. That's why I really believe in what we're doing in this BIA on the Canada Workers' Benefit, because the reality, and I hate this reality about the Canadian economy, and I hope working together we can change this. There are a lot of people in Canada today who work really hard every day, who do some of the hardest jobs and like less glamorous and fun than our jobs, like the people who are going to clean up this building when we leave today. Those people, a lot of those essential workers, they can work really hard and they can have a job, and they still don't make enough to make ends meet. And that's why I'm a big believer in the Canada Worker Benefit, and we've increased it and we're paying it in advance. And that is also why, Daniel has spoken about this. Like, our focus during the COVID recession and afterwards has been, if you said to me, what's the one indicator, what's the one data point you want to optimize, I would say jobs, jobs, jobs. And on that measure, Canada has done remarkably well. 129% of jobs recovered compared to pre-pandemic. compared to depths of COVID, compared to 115% in the U.S. And I repeat, that's like 900,000 more jobs. And I repeat that just like for the reasons that you raised. Like, I want all Canadians to have a great life. And I believe that a great life starts with a great, well-paying job, doing work you care about and which is respected, and knowing that when you get older, knowing that when you get sick, you have a healthcare system that can take care of you, knowing that your kids are in a great early learning and childcare center, and when you retire after a life working hard, building our country, you're going to have a great pension. So that is my focus. I hope it's the focus of all of us.
Merci. Thank you, Minister. Thank you, MP Chattel. And now we are going to the block and to MP Sainte-Marie, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I wish to salute the quality of Ms. Chatel's intervention about tax avoidance and tax evasion. Ms. Freeland, your testimony about food banks was very touching, and I thank you for that, and I think we all want to combat poverty. During the pandemic, you were there to support the economy, to help people, to help everyone. There is a blind spot, though. That is the Employment Insurance Fund. The deficit in that didn't go on to the Consolidated Revenue Fund. The Employment Insurance Act forces the fund to balance itself out. So unless there's an amendment to the Act to erase the, to put that deficit into the Consolidated Revenue Fund, that's a lot of money that the government will be taking from taxpayers. That makes any reform of the system to make it more accessible impossible. There's nothing in C-47 to avoid this tragedy. Why? Thank you for your question, and thank you as well. I agree that Ms. Chatel's question and her work is very important. Now, Mr. Sainte-Marie, I also want to thank you for your work concerning tax loopholes and tax evasion. We've done a lot together. We've improved Canada's system, but I think there's still a lot of work to be done. And I'd be very pleased to work with all members to do that. Food banks are one side of the issue. The other side is having a fair tax system where everyone does his or her fair share to help us help the most vulnerable. Now, with regard to the employment insurance system, Mr. Blakey asked almost the same question. And I'll give you three answers. First of all, we have a lot of work to do together to improve our employment insurance system by modernizing it. Secondly, and maybe we won't agree on this point, but really, to my mind, the cornerstone of my job as Minister of Finance is to strike a balance between a compassionate approach and a responsible approach. We have to do both. As far as I'm concerned, we have not lowered contributions to EI, contrary to the Conservatives' demands, and that's responsible. And fiscal responsibility is really important, and I really want to underscore that. To me, fiscal responsibility is important because that is what enables us to make those investments that are so important, such as the modernization of the EI system, such as the Canada Worker Benefits, and the investments in healthcare. Thank you for the answer. Of course, for years and years, we saw surpluses in the EI fund that went to the Consolidated Revenue Fund, and now we're penalizing workers and the unemployed. We're waiting impatiently for the reform of EI to make it truly accessible to all. 2 years ago, C-208 was adopted, a bill to stop penalizing the transfer of family businesses, especially farms. We're still waiting for that to be used. Tax accountants and accountants in Quebec are saying they're waiting for ARC instructions. They wanted you to clarify the situation so that they can do so. So we're often called upon on that topic by companies, by families, and by accountants. Do you have any comments on that? Thank you. Yes, and thank you very much. That's a really important topic. I hope you will agree that in the budget, we really improved this measure in order to allow family farms in Quebec, for example, to use this important measure. I hope you agree. That was our goal, and we worked very hard to achieve this. Mio just reminded me and reassured me that on January 1st, 2024, the system will be in place. And that's good news for everybody. But we really have to vote for the budget first in order to allow family farms in Quebec and elsewhere in the country to use this very important measure. Thank you for the answer. Thank you, Mr. Sainte-Marie.
Final questioner, MP Blakey.
Well, thank you very much, Minister, for choosing to stay a little longer, and look forward to being able to plan for longer appearances in the future. I do have a few questions that I'd like to ask. One has to do with the excise tax. One of the things that the Budget Implementation Act does, as you know, is limits the increase in the excise tax to 2%. I think there were many critics of the notion when it was first introduced that increases in the excise tax would be tied automatically to inflation. I'm wondering if this year's exception has been cause for reflection on the part of the government about the idea of maintaining an automatic escalator going forward.
So first of all, let me again commend you, Mr. Blakey, for your peacemaking role. And I say that kind of with a smile because we're coming to the end. But really, seriously, thanks a lot. And I do think Canadians sent us all here to work together. And for sure, to be clear about the areas where we disagree, but also where we find areas where we agree to actually advance the work of Canada. On the excise tax, inflation is coming down. The Bank of Canada targets inflation between 1% and 3%. Inflation has been coming down from its peak of 8.1 to 4.4, and the CPI, which the Bank of Canada looks at, has continued to come down. Bank is forecasting inflation will be 3% in the summer, below 3% by the end of the year. So I think that will make your question purely theoretical and not relevant to the steady, low inflation reality of Canada going forward once we get past this extraordinary pandemic economy moment. And we are getting past it. And that's a really good news for Canadians.
Time will tell, and I
have great confidence in the Bank of Canada.
I certainly hope that those forecasts are right, but I think there'll remain a kind of philosophical question about the prudence of automatic escalators in respect of the excise tax. I wanted to ask, we're on now, there's some changes proposed in the bill to the Air Passenger Bill of Rights, and this would be at least the second iteration, I think, certainly in respect of the government, although even more so in respect of bills presented by members of Parliament around air passenger rights. There's been a fair bit of criticism already of the proposed changes in this act. I know my colleague Taylor Bachrach has done some good work on this file. I think part of what's at issue is that some of the terminology in the proposed changes is vague, and I think leaves a lot to government regulation as opposed to legislation, in a context where I think folks really felt that the government's first shot at an air passenger Bill of Rights was inadequate. And so I'm wondering about the openness to considering changes to what's proposed in the Act, and specifically on the question of being a little more clear in the legislation itself about how this is meant to be implemented and what some of the criteria are that Canadians could expect to be laid out transparently in terms of what their rights are.
Okay. Well, thank you for the question. All of us, in addition to our work, on issues like Finance Committee, are constituency MPs. And even if we're not directly responsible for transport, we are constituency MPs. And as constituency MPs, I am sure every single one of us has a constituent or has many constituents who have raised passenger issues. I think this is a truth universally acknowledged in Canada. And I think it's absolutely right for us as MPs to be focused on this and to support the rights of Canadians who travel. Canada's a really big country. You have to fly to do your job as an MP. I have to fly to visit my family in Alberta. I mean, I could drive, but it would take a really, really long time. So all of us have to do it. And I do think there is a meaningful role for Parliament and the government to protect the rights of all of us as passengers. As you mentioned, we're working on it. I think that in the BIA, we're making meaningful improvements. That's why I referred to those measures in my kind of opening remarks as a reason to get on with it. The Prime Minister likes to say better is always possible. That's true too, and always happy to continue the conversation.
Right on.
Thank you. And
happy to continue, Mr. Chair.
Well, that's the time. But thank you, MP Blake, and I should thank you for opening the door to the many extra questions, and Minister for providing us that extra time to answer many of the questions. They're very important to all those Canadians watching. This impacts their lives daily, hopefully in a very positive way. And we want to thank you for coming before committee and all of your officials, also for being with us as you inform the BIA. Thank you very much. And members, at this time, we're suspended, and we'll be back after question period and votes. Thanks. So when we suspended last, I was just about to go to PS Beach because he was last on our list. PS Beach.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all members that worked vigorously during the break and over question period. I would like to seek unanimous consent for the following motion: that the committee consider both the sub-amendment from Mr. Morantz and the amendment from Mr. Blakey withdrawn, that the motion be amended by adding, after clause B2, a new clause which would read 3, if the committee has not completed the clause-by-clause consideration of the bill by 4:30 p.m. on Monday, May 29th, 2023, all remaining amendments submitted to the committee shall be deemed moved. The chair shall put the question forthwith and successively, without further debate, on all remaining clauses and proposed amendments, as well as each and every question necessary to dispose of clause-by-clause considerations of the bill, as well as all questions necessary to report the bill to the House and to order the chair to report the bill to the House as soon as possible, and that clause E, F, and G be removed from the motion, And just for everybody's awareness, this removes the letters that would be sent out to other committees, and that the motion be adopted as amended on division, and assuming that we have unanimous consent for that, that the committee adjourn.
I heard a no.
I believe there's a speaking list, right, Mr. Chair?
There is.
I may reconsider my position, but I believe there's a speaking list, correct?
Speaking list, I have P.S. Beach is up on the speaking list, and
I'm prepared to let the parliamentary secretary test the room, perhaps a little bit later, but no.
Yeah,
no.
Can we suspend for 5 minutes?
okay, we'll suspend. Back. We did not have UC, so where we are right now is we are back to the sub-amendment of MP Blakey's amendment to P.S. Beach's motion.
Okay, and so do I tell the floor?
You do.
I would seek unanimous consent to give up the floor to Adam and then request to be given the floor back.
Agreement on that? Yep, okay. Yes, okay. MP Chambers.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. What we had here with the minister, what is billed to be the hottest ticket in town, so I need to thank the Prime Minister's office for allowing the minister to come. I understand that this committee is not functioning very well. I think Mr. Blakey made a very wise recommendation to the minister that when invitations come from the committee, that the minister take them seriously. I can't for the life of me understand why a minister of any portfolio would ignore an invitation from the committee blatantly. Yes, Ms. Zurwich is correct that the minister has appeared here 3 or 4 times in the last 12 months or whatever the number is. The fact is it's been the will of the committee to invite the minister here. And yes, we can't compel the minister, and that's completely fair under our Westminster system. But that the minister seems to, the only conclusion that we can draw is that the minister seems to think that this committee and Parliament is an inconvenience. If the minister is going to continue to ignore invitations from the committee won't function. And I'm going to say we will not provide UC, because as long as I'm sitting in this seat right here, I will not provide UC to move on any piece of government legislation or study or anything until it looks like there's some more respect for the will of the committee. Now there's enough blame to go around here to spread it from here to Aurelia. But the fact of the matter is we're sitting in this position because a minister of the Crown feels it's an inconvenience to appear before a committee to answer questions. And even when the minister appears, now it's one thing to get her into the room, and even when the minister appears, to not actually answer a question such as, what is the government spending on interest on the debt? If anyone wants to go and look at Secretary Yellen in the U.S. and how they run Senate committee hearings and how their secretaries actually answer questions, if you watch that and watch what just happened here a couple hours ago, it's shameful. And if I'm ever in the position, lucky enough to be in the position on the other side of the table, I hope somebody reminds me of that when I'm answering questions. The second point, I feel sorry for my government colleagues because they have to defend the minister not wishing to appear in front of committee. If the member from Malpeque, when he was the Minister of Finance, could not answer or refused to answer what one of the top 3 spending line items in PEI were when he was the Minister of Finance, I'm pretty sure he'd be out of a job. And furthermore, there is competent parliamentary secretaries all through this government who actually try to answer questions when they're asked. They should be in cabinet. The number one thing that I hear back from constituents in terms of feedback from what happens in this place if they stumble upon late at night any of the hearings is that why does nobody answer a question? And that's for everybody. That's for all parties, not just the government. Why does everybody not answer a question? If anyone went to watch the Committee of the Whole last night and saw the Minister of Housing not even answer what time it was, it seems like it's a game. And people wonder why we have no respect for parliamentary institutions and why the respect is going down. It's because it's being treated like a joke. So I hope that if I'm ever lucky enough to be on the other side of the table, that I'll be reminded of this by somebody. But the fact that we have to defend a minister's right to ignore invitations from the committee and then to be kind of treated like, oh, well, I'm gracing you with my presence. I'm not going to answer any questions. Oh, and I don't give in to bullies. It wasn't a bully request that the committee made when we passed a motion to have the minister come along with the bank governor every quarter until inflation comes down in the control range. That is like the most simplest explanation. I can't understand for the life of me why we're in a position where the committee can't work solely on the basis of a minister not wanting to come. Now, it's possible maybe the conspiracy theory is true. I've spent too much time with some of my friends that it is the Prime Minister's office that doesn't want the minister to come, but she's obviously quite capable of coming. She's trusted to sit in rooms and negotiate NAFTA or CETA and go to G7 meetings, but can't come to a parliamentary committee. I'm a bit frustrated with the fact that it's all of a sudden our fault on this side of the table for the position we're in. Sure, we could negotiate better, and sure, we maybe could go along to get along a bit more, but we were the party who agreed to pre-study the bill. We didn't last year. That was out of good faith. And then to find out that the minister will appear but won't tell us for how long is completely unhelpful to the functioning of this committee. And there won't be a government study passed from here on in without an invitation to the minister. There won't be a motion passed at this committee without an invitation to the minister. Every single motion we pass at this committee will include an invitation to the minister until it is better received and respected. For someone, and I have the deepest respect for somebody who's been put in a position where the Prime Minister obviously has given the Minister of Finance and Deputy Prime Minister significant responsibility, and she has a very tough job. But one of those responsibilities is to face questions and to be able to tell the Canadians the government story. It's either they're ashamed of the story or they find this place an inconvenience. They can't be both. And it's unbelievably frustrating, not just for me, because nobody really cares about how we feel here, but for anybody watching, to watch somebody who cannot even list the top two of the top three spending items. It's not that she doesn't know. She obviously knows where we spend our money. Is that she refuses to answer a question from a Conservative. We're not going to have a fully functioning committee until we find ourselves in a better place. And we're not going to go travel on pre-budget consultations. We're not going to go travel anywhere else, and we're not going to pass any government study as long as I'm sitting here and we do not have the minister respecting invitations to the committee. We have a lot better things to do and hearing from witnesses than to sit here and talk out the clock for 25 hours. Unfortunately, the opposition only has one tool, and it's a pretty blunt tool. If we want the committee to work better, I would implore government members, not because I said it, but to take the advice of Mr. Blakey. The minister seemed to take it, but was a little coy about whether she would accept another invitation from this committee. The only time the minister has showed up, the only times the minister has showed up to this committee is to pass legislation, to pass government legislation, not because the committee's invited her. And this notion that the minister was unaware, we weren't able to invite her for 2 hours because the committee didn't pass the motion is complete BS. It's not possible that that's the case. I understand we have resources till 12 p.m. tonight. But I know that we've been sitting here for a long time. But people deserve, and if you're not going to do it for us or like parliamentarians, people deserve to know that ministers can be held accountable to the committees. If the government had a majority on parliamentary committee or had won a majority in the last election, go nuts. But the truth is, we've had multiple invitations to a minister of the Crown to show up, even on supplementary estimates, which I actually understand. If a minister is invited on supplementary estimates, you can compel them to show up on supplementary estimates. Now, if we don't want to create a precedent of making it contingent on passing, going to clause by clause without having a minister show up, we're not actually doing a really good job of setting a precedent, because the only precedent we've been setting is that ministers can just tell committees to go fly a kite. So I don't know why any minister would show up to any committee now. The precedent is set. You don't need to. You only need to show up if you want to pass legislation, and even then. But there's plenty of other capable members that would answer questions and show up to committee, I'm sure. The parliamentary secretary to the housing minister last night should be the housing minister, based on the ability of her to answer questions from all sides of the House. But that it must be some kind of game where they decide, no matter what the question is, I'm not going to answer. So if we want a better functioning committee, you don't have to run back and say, oh, the Conservatives are making this recommendation. All we have to do is take the recommendation, and the minister has to take and listen to the recommendation of Mr. Blakey. But we'll be in the same position in the fall, in next year, the next time there's a bill, BIA2, if we're in a position where the minister is not answering invitations to committee. And it's not extortion. It's not bullying. It's asking for the minister to respect the will of committee, which is something that the parliamentary secretary, Mr. Beach, has been reminding us that it's the majority position of the committee to pass his motion. It's the majority position of the committee. Well, it's also the majority position of the committee to invite the minister. So if the parliamentary secretary wants to test the room again on unanimous consent, I'll leave the table so that I'm not here. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, MP Chambers. And I'll go back to
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would seek unanimous consent for the following motion, and there's been a small tweak to help out with the clerk on one of his timings. So I'll read it again, and then I'll add the tweak. That the committee consider both the sub-amendment from Mr. Morantz and the amendment from Mr. Blakey withdrawn. That the motion be amended by adding, after clause B2, a new section which would read 3, if the committee has not completed the clause-by-clause consideration of the bill by 4:30 p.m. on Monday, May 29th, 2023, all remaining amendments submitted to the committee shall be deemed moved. The chair shall put the question forthwith and successively without further debate on all remaining clauses and proposed amendments, as well as each and every question necessary to dispose of clause-by-clause consideration of the bill, as well as all questions necessary to report the bill to the House and to order the chair to report the bill to the House as soon as possible. That clause E, F, and G be removed from the motion, and that the motion be adopted as amended on division, and that under BI, where it says amendments be submitted to the clerk of the committee in both official languages no later than 4 p.m. on Friday, May 19th, 2023, be changed to by noon on Friday, May 19th, 2023. And if we have unanimous consent, that the committee now adjourn.
No.
We don't have UC.
Appel au règlement.
On a point of order, Mr. Chairperson. On a point of order.
MP Samari?
Oui. Moi, je suis...
Now, I could agree with what Terry just proposed, but I need a number of guarantees. First, what's being proposed is that we start clause-by-clause consideration on the 29th of May. That leaves us Thursday of this week plus the break week. Now, initially, we reached an agreement to send the various parts of the bill to the various committees. I know that it's not working and that we don't have enough time left for that. That said, I'd like us to be able to study seriously this 500-page bill that carries with it astronomical expenditures, and if the Finance Committee does it all by itself, that's all well and good, but let's make sure we have a reasonable number of meetings. So, right off the bat, in support of Terry's proposal, by consent, I would request a guaranteed number of meetings. 5 perhaps, 5 two-hour meetings, that could be effective. I would like us to push back the deadline for amendments. We have witnesses to hear from, and after their testimony, there may very well be amendments that we bring forward to do our job, to study the bill, listen to folks, factor in what they've said when we move amendments. Ideally, I'd like the deadline of the 29th of May, clause by clause, to be 1 week later. If that's not possible, at least there should be a guarantee of 5 meetings, 2 hours each with witnesses, and that the date to submit amendments be pushed back. It's currently the 19th of May, so Friday this week. And I would suggest Friday the 26th of May. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, could
thank you,
I request...
MP Sainte-Marie?
Could I request a 3-minute suspension so I can make a phone call?
Okay, we will suspend.